Jupiter is going to betray Emu. The entire point of the Egghead Island arc is that because you cannot truly erase free will, it is impossible to ever have a truly, completely obedient group of subordinates. We've seen this with Vegapunk's creations rebelling, we've seen this with Cypherpole agents rebelling, we've seen this with Marines rebelling, and yes, finally and most importantly, we're going to see it with even Emu's supposedly absolute servants, the Gorosei. Because not even God can erase free will. Even if Emu literally created the Gorosei in the first place to be his puppets, all signs point to one of them rebelling, as the internal desires of living creatures can never truly be stamped out. And the one who is most clearly set to rebel is Jupiter, the only Gorosei who we suspiciously have not heard any internal thoughts or monologues from so far, who is very notably depicted as younger than the rest of the Gorosei, and most importantly, who has a specific ability that clearly marks him as being conceived separately from the other 4 Gorosei. But before we can understand why the signs I'm referring to point to Jupiter being the eventual traitor, the servant who rebels against God, first I have to break down why the Gorosei are very clearly set to have a traitor in the first place. But first, I want to offer you all a huge deal on a VPN. For less than $3 a month, you can use Surfshark VPN, the sponsor for this video. Most VPNs are $15 a month, but among all of the top-of-the-line VPNs, Surfshark is offering a deal for only my viewers for only $3 a month and an extra 4 months free, with a 30-day money-back guarantee so you can try out Surfshark and compare it to your more expensive VPN risk-free. And if you're not already using a VPN, well, you need to, because VPNs are what most people use nowadays to keep their information secure when they're online. If you're not using a VPN, it's basically like you're running around naked, because everything, your passwords, your identity, it's at risk when you're online. And these days, more and more people's passwords are being stolen from these huge and frequent data breaches that are happening at even well-known social media websites. Not only does Surfshark protect you, it also just started Surfshark Alert, meaning Surfshark will actually tell you anytime someone tries to use your email, your password, or your ID in any sort of unauthorized way online. So stop paying so much for your VPN, just use Surfshark for less than $3 a month, and get the best online security on the market that you can get at easily the best prices out there. Just enter coupon code MORGE at surfshark.deal/Morge, link in the description below, or you can just scan the QR code. So that aside, to begin with, yes, a member of the Gorosei is going to be a traitor, as it would be borderline antithetical to the themes and messaging of the entire Egghead Island arc in the first place if one of them wasn't a traitor. Why is that? Because literally the entire storyline has been very specifically about how it is impossible to create perfectly obedient subordinates. The very first message we got from the start of the arc was that you simply cannot stamp out the desires of living beings no matter what you do. This simple facet can never be controlled. That's why this entire arc has painstakingly shown us over and over and over again, group after group, faction after faction, of supposedly obedient subordinates where time and again a member of said group ultimately rebels. The Marines are supposed to be completely loyal servants to the world government, and yet Centauri rebels. CP0 are supposed to be completely loyal servants to the Celestial Dragons, and yet Stussy rebels. And now perhaps even Kaku. Note, in all of One Piece, these are the first times that we have ever had a Marine or a Cypherpole agent openly turn against the world government and the Celestial Dragons and declare them their enemy. But this defining theme of Egghead Island goes beyond just soldiers breaking free of their brainwashing, it's all-encompassing. Because even manufactured beings, literally designed from the ground up to be obedient servants, even they continually rebel throughout the arc. From the very first Sea Shark in the first chapter of the arc disobeying its directive, to the Seraphim disobeying their supposedly absolute directives to instead carry out their personal desires. We are shown that you cannot program absolute obedience into living beings, even if you create them yourself. And then of course we have the defining character of the entire arc, Kuma, whose storyline is about being reduced into a mindless automaton, with literally no conscious thought of his own left anymore, the perfect slave. And despite all that, in the end, finally even Kuma is able to break free of his slavery and rebel, proving that a completely obedient servant is literally impossible to create no matter what you do. So this entire arc has been about presenting us various groups of supposedly obedient servants, the Marines, CP0, the Seraphim, the Pacifista, even random androids, and showing how there will always be at least one member of the group who breaks free of their programming and rebels. And that's why it's so thematically fitting that the villains of this arc are in fact a group of supposedly perfectly obedient servants, the Gorosei. The Gorosei are portrayed as the ultimate ideal subordinate puppets. They are seemingly truly fully devoted to their master. They are always focused on the same common goal. They often speak as one, think as one, and act as one. They are unlike all the past groups of bickering subordinates that we've seen before in One Piece. And that's precisely why the Gorosei are perfect for this arc, because this arc is about illustrating how such an ideal group of servants is actually impossible. There will always be a flaw. You simply cannot have complete subservience. There will always be a breakdown somewhere. Do you really think that Imu, the bad guy, just conveniently has perfectly obedient slaves, when the entire message of the arc is that no matter how controlling you are, you cannot truly erase the free will of your subordinates? If anything, it's overwhelmingly likely that the whole purpose of the Gorosei being the villains of the Egghead arc is to drive the overall point home, that there cannot be true uniform obedience, not even among the Gorosei, as even God cannot erase free will completely to create perfectly subservient puppets. There will be an imperfection among the Gorosei revealed at some point or another. And this major plot development of a traitor among God's subordinates is also clearly foreshadowed in previous arcs, Dressrosa and Skypiea. So we all know the similarities at this point between Imu and the Gorosei, Doflamingo and his seats, and Enel and his priests. Doflamingo and Enel were the two previous god-complex rulers of One Piece, who acted very similarly to Imu. They believed that they were divine beings, while they viewed all other humans as ants or inferior beings, and they would erase anyone who disobeyed. I elaborate on this in past videos, but the parallels between these god-complex villains is very blatant, as is the framing of them in relation to their core subordinates, the Gorosei, the seats, and the priests. But what's interesting is that while Imu has 5 key subordinates, Doflamingo and Enel only had 4. Why is that? Oda is so on the nose with his parallels between these 3 villains in so many other ways, but in this specific aspect of the number of their subordinates, he broke the similarities and gave Imu 1 extra subordinate for some reason. Or did he? I actually think it's more likely that Oda likes the idea of these god-type villains always having 4 subordinates, and the only reason Imu seems to have 5 at the moment is because we are going to get the same narrative plotline play out with Imu and the Gorosei that we already saw with Doflamingo and his seats. Because see, Doflamingo originally also had 5 seat-level subordinates. Corazon was the heart seat, Pika was spades, Diamante was diamond, Trouble was clubs, and finally Virgo was the hidden seat who was in charge of the family's outside operations. Even though Virgo wasn't officially called a seat at the time, we are shown that in terms of hierarchy, he was factually of the same rank as the other seats. And Virgo had his own officers under his command, just like the other seats. So Doflamingo had 5 seats. He had 5 loyal subordinates of equal status working under him, who all seemed deeply devoted to him, just like Imu and the Gorosei. However, one of Doflamingo's 5 subordinates secretly wasn't as devoted to his master as he seemed, and was plotting his downfall all along. Corazon betrayed Doflamingo. That's why at the time of the actual Dressrosa saga, when it's time to actually take on and defeat Doflamingo, Doflamingo only has 4 subordinates on his side who the protagonists need to defeat, an identical setup to Enel and his 4 priests. And this is exactly what we can expect with Imu and the Gorosei as well. Yes, there are 5 right now, but we are likely set up for a betrayal and rebellion by one of them, much like with Doflamingo and his seats, leaving Imu with 4 true subordinates in the end, as that is the setup that Oda always likes. An evil god with 4 subordinates that must be defeated. But now you might be saying, Morge, how could the Gorosei even betray Imu? I mean, the Gorosei seem like they may have been straight up created by Imu. They can do all sorts of strange things, like communicate telepathically, and be summoned with pentagrams like demons, and they seem like they don't age. In fact, they really don't seem to be humans, but possibly literal demonic creations by Imu. So in that case, how could they betray their maker? And to that, I'd say I definitely agree. In fact, I've even done a video breaking down why it is extremely likely that Imu straight up created the Gorosei, as you can see here. But that actually only doubles down on the likelihood of rebellion. Because you see, if the Gorosei are in fact creations of Imu, and perhaps even manifestations of parts of Imu's own being. Well then, Oda has basically foreshadowed one of the Gorosei betraying Imu in the most blatant way possible, with the story of Vegapunk and his satellites. The single strongest parallel we possibly have to Imu and the Gorosei, if the Gorosei are in fact born from Imu's own being, is in how Vegapunk split up aspects of his own being into his satellite bodies. And while the satellites are all supposed to be serving the same goals as all aspects of the same being, and they all supposedly share their thoughts together, in reality they have still been separated into individual living beings, which means that they are prone to their own personal desires, and you simply cannot curb the individual desires of living beings. Such a perfect system of obedience is impossible, even if those living beings are technically a piece of one original individual. The whole story of York and how that is a defining plot point of Egghead Island basically screams that the exact same thing can and should happen among the Gorosei. If they were all created by Imu, drawn out from Imu's own mind, his own persona, to obey his every whim and serve that purpose, then of course the story of the satellites and how such an existence leads to betrayal is blatant foreshadowing for a parallel betrayal among the Gorosei. However, the contrast would of course be that whereas Vegapunk himself is overall a good man, and York is the aspect of him that is driven by greed and therefore chose to rebel against her creator for selfish purposes, the story of Jupiter would be the opposite. Whereas his master is selfish and evil, Jupiter may have some piece of good within him that drives him to rebel against his creator for the sake of humans. In effect, much in the same way Corazon rebelled against Doflamingo because of his kind heart. And that brings us to Jupiter himself. If the entire story is screaming that one of the Gorosei is going to rebel and betray God, why is it that I'm insistent that it will be Jupiter specifically? Well, because to start with, in the entire Egghead raid, Jupiter is the one Gorosei who Oda has kept a complete mystery. If you read and pay attention to each Gorosei throughout Egghead, they all have clearly expressed lines of thinking, with us getting to hear their innermost thoughts, their private internal monologues, and we get to see them repeatedly expressing their intents, their frustrations, their anger at struggling to accomplish their mission, and so on. All of them, that is, except for Jupiter. Jupiter has been strangely silent. He has been a complete black box in this battle so far. Yes, Jupiter is carrying out the appropriate actions of attempting to help stop the Straw Hats, but it's been in a much more low-key manner than the other Gorosei. Whereas we can see the desperation and drive in Mars to find the transmission and stop it, and we can tell that this is a genuine desire of the character. Whereas we can see Venus Juro immediately secure all the Pacifista and free all the Seraphim and Cypherpole, and we can tell for a fact that Venus Juro is completely and utterly focused on achieving the world government's goals. Whereas we can see Warcury's furious efforts to stop Luffy and the Giants, and we know that he isn't faking his anger or his emotion. Whereas we can see the depths of Saturn's evil, and we are shown his hatred for humans and his obsessiveness to carry out his creator's will is genuine. Well, Jupiter is lacking all of that. We have yet to get inner thoughts, internal monologues, significant displays of emotion, verbal expressions, and so on. In terms of actions, he has made some basic attempts against Luffy and the Giants, but he hasn't actually achieved anything for the world government in this battle so far, like Warcury, Venus Juro, Mars, and Saturn have. And most importantly, he's had very little expressed drive and intent to accomplish the mission the way the others have been written so far. Basically, if you go through Egghead and read all the dialogue, monologues, and actions of Warcury, Venus Juro, Mars, and Saturn, it is almost impossible to imagine any of them as traitors. Whereas if you do the same for Jupiter, it is almost strikingly suspicious how passively and quietly Oda has written him compared to the rest. He is simply by far the least impactful and quietest Gorosei. It's not even as though this is because Jupiter is the weakest, therefore the least relevant, as it seems very likely that Saturn is actually the weakest Gorosei, which means that with Jupiter, he's being written differently from the rest by Oda for some other reason. There's also the fact that Jupiter seems to be the youngest member, which is a significant clue as to why he may be different from the rest of the Gorosei. But with regards to that point, you can get my extended thoughts on why that is on my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. But that aside, by far the biggest red flag for Jupiter being a traitor is his Zoan ability. Now you might be asking, what the hell? What's wrong with Jupiter being a sandworm? Well, everything. See, to begin with, when we were first shown a glimpse of the Gorosei Zoan forms in the throne room, even though they were all silhouettes, all of them clearly had planned out defined forms that obviously matched what we later on saw they looked like in their full reveal. The silhouettes matched their final designs. That's the case for all of them, that is, except for Jupiter. For some reason, Jupiter's throne room silhouette doesn't look in any way like the Zoan form that we got later. If anything, it seems like Oda didn't even draw Jupiter's throne room silhouette with anything in particular in mind. Rather, Oda kept it vague and generic, almost as though Oda hadn't yet decided what Jupiter's actual form would be, despite already having a clear vision for the rest of the Gorosei. It seems like only Jupiter was given a temporary placeholder design. Now you might be saying, but Morge, maybe it wasn't a vague placeholder silhouette, maybe Oda just didn't have room to draw his Zoan form. And that would be decently possible if not for the fact that the Zoan that Jupiter turned out to be was a sandworm. This is very, very blatantly pulled from the extremely popular 2024 movie Dune 2 that had come out in the time since the throne room scene. Dune was a wildly popular global phenomenon, and the sandworm is a major iconic centerpiece of this film. Like, they were literally marketing Dune 2 with popcorn buckets modeled after the sandworm. And guess what? The sandworm isn't some common mythical creature that Oda might have been inspired to draw from some other source. No, the sandworm is specifically a made-up concept from Dune. It's only a Dune thing. There is zero chance that Oda came up with the concept of a giant sandworm independent of Dune. Oda very clearly just saw Dune and pulled the sandworm concept from it and made that Jupiter's ability. Now maybe if Oda had just made Jupiter a giant worm in general, then sure, I could get behind the possibility that Oda had always planned Jupiter to be a giant worm, without having seen Dune. But no, this is very literally, word for word, a sandworm, meaning it's the fucking sandworm from Dune. Oda got this from a movie. And if you really want to make an argument just for the sake of making an argument, well then technically you could say that, well, the Dune novels have been out for decades, so maybe Oda actually read the Dune book like decades ago, and so he's always planned on Jupiter being a sandworm for decades, and it's just a random coincidence that Jupiter's reveal as a sandworm came out the same year as the Dune 2 movie came out that popularized the concept of the sandworm. As wildly unlikely as that sounds, you could maybe technically have a case, except then when you remember that the Jupiter silhouette looked nothing like a sandworm in the first place, then it's just too obvious that no, Oda did not have this sandworm stuff planned from the start. He just saw the movie and decided to pull the concept from Dune and apply it to Jupiter. So now you must be asking, okay, so why the hell does that even matter? So what if Oda pulled Jupiter's design from a movie? It matters because it means that Jupiter is the only Gorosei that Oda really didn't plan the abilities for from earlier on. Oda clearly had concepts ready for the other Gorosei from the get-go that he clearly stuck to. Jupiter was the only one that was left vague and undefined at the beginning, that Oda then picked a random ability for much later on. That essentially means that from the very beginning, Oda did not consider Jupiter's abilities to be that important, unlike the rest of the Gorosei. This is huge because it means that from the start, Oda was not really concerned with thinking of Jupiter as a final matchup for the heroes. Think about it, if Oda was not thinking about Jupiter's ability at all, then that means that Oda was clearly not thinking of Jupiter as an important future opponent for the protagonists. Remember, the Gorosei exist to be villains. They exist to be opponents to be defeated by protagonists. And they were even introduced as intended final villains really early on in the story. If you are a writer, you are not coming up with the hero's final opponents for the entire fucking story decades in advance without at least giving some thought to what their abilities are going to be. I mean, from Venus Juro's literal introduction, Oda was already thinking out, okay, this one is going to be a swordsman with a Kitetsu blade because he's going to fight Zoro, right? This is really basic stuff. Again, these are the final opponents. It's almost impossible to go decades writing these guys without thinking at all about their abilities and what type of final matchup that they will be for the key protagonists. So if, among the 5 Gorosei, there is only one that Oda, for decades, never really put any thought into their ability, to the point that his final ability was a literal last-minute decision, well, that is a huge sign that this character's ability wasn't ever going to be that important in the first place, because this character was never actually going to be a final opponent for any of the heroes. Oda had the concept for these other ones penciled in, but for Jupiter, and only Jupiter, he was just like, F it, I can come up with it later because it never really mattered. From Oda's perspective, Jupiter's Zoan form could have been a unicorn, a giant dog, a flying elephant, it never f***ing mattered because he was never going to be an important fight for anyone. The plan was always for Jupiter to betray Imu and aid the protagonists in some way. That's why Oda seems to have chosen Jupiter's Zoan form so casually from a movie that came out literally the same year that he had to do all the Gorosei Zoan reveals. And so, if overall Oda put zero thought into Jupiter's abilities, whereas he had clearly planned out the others for a while, and Jupiter has been written as a strangely passive outlier among the 5 Gorosei all throughout the Egghead battle, and we can expect that based on the themes of the arc and foreshadowing from previous storylines, that one of the Gorosei is going to be a traitor, well then all signs ultimately point to Jupiter being the one to betray Imu and turn against God. So let me know how you think Jupiter will betray Imu in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear how Jupiter's age is even more evidence that he will be the traitor, then you can get my extended thoughts on my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. And make sure you get your amazing deal for Surfshark VPN for less than $3 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Enter coupon code MORGE for an extra 4 months free at surfshark.deal/morge. You can hit the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code.